Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda with Chronus, and today we're here with our CEO, David Satterwhite, to talk about how senior leaders can get into a reverse mentoring mindset. And David, you have been talking about this for a bit since you kind of joined the Cronus team, and how important kind of two-way mentorship and thinking about what you can gain from a mentoring relationship and how important that's been in your life. So I was wondering if you can kind of kick us off with this. Why should organizations be thinking about reverse mentoring? Why is it important? Why is this kind of reverse of the traditional relationship, valid for the workplace today?
Yeah, the first two things that comes to mind are first of all, you double the impact. You double the impact. The learning is instead of the learning going all from leadership to people who are lower down the organizational chain, if you will. You double the impact. You've got learning coming the other way as well, and so I think that's super powerful. But even more important, I fundamentally believe that most leadership teams are out of touch. They're out of touch with what's going on in their company. It's fascinating to me um, how out of touch most leadership teams, not to mention boards, are in terms of what's actually happening in their company. And sure, we have metrics and dashboards and spreadsheets and all kinds of things that put things into numbers, which help us, very importantly, read what's going on in our companies. But if you think you have an accurate picture of what's happening in your company, if you're not learning from the people who are doing the work, I think you're deluding yourself. And two-way mentorship is just a wonderful way to be able to get that information, get that understanding, build that empathy, and take that into and help make better decisions as a company. So I think both those reasons. I think it's super important.
Obviously, asking for feedback is always kind of tough, but, in a reverse mentoring relationship where the junior person is the mentor and the senior person is a mentee, what advice do you kind of have for a senior person? Because, being in the position where they're getting feedback or guidance from someone who's a bit younger than them, it can feel a little weird. It can feel a little unnatural, especially for someone who's been in leadership for maybe 5, 10 years, something like that. How do they get comfortable with it?
It's a great point, Amanda. And it can be intimidating for the person who has less experience in the relationship. So I think as the person who has more experience maybe comes potentially from more of a power position in whatever the relationship is, just being quite intentional about the questions and the topics. What I've done really successfully is at the start of the relationship, I've set it up this way. So said like I want to set up a relationship where I'm able to learn from you and you're able to learn from me. And so really being clear up front that that's the case, I think helps them think about that, know that that's going to be normal. If you just sort of stumble into it, it can be a little, sometimes it's natural, but it can be harder than if you kind of clearly set the boundaries up front, or the sandbox, if you will, in terms of what you guys are going to work on. Um, I was really fortunate to be the executive sponsor for the Black at UT group, ERG group at my last company, and so I really purposefully set up some relationships with uh, some people on the team who were both different in gender and different in ethnic background and different in upbringing, and we very clearly like mapped out in the beginning, this is what we were intending to do. That way, the person with less experience knows to be coming with and open to questions that they have answers to from their background, just like a mentor would, or just like the most experienced person would, if the roles are different.
I think you bring up a great point about setting up that relationship ahead of time, setting the expectations. I think that's very important and something we tell people is absolutely necessary when you're setting up a reverse mentoring program. We also kind of bring up the idea that it's important for the senior leader who's a mentee in this relationship to be mindful, be intentional, as you mentioned, and do a little prep ahead of time. Think about the questions that you really have. Are these questions I need to ask this person, or could I do some research ahead of time to get my bearings on the knowledge that I'm trying to gain and have more of a dialogue with them rather than just showing up and saying, well, I got a list of 20 questions and I thought maybe you could answer them, and, things like that. So what do you think about kind of that approach?
It's a really important point, Amanda, because as someone who typically in these relationships is the mentor, you have a tendency to not do as much homework, and you're so much of what you're providing comes from experience that you just walk into the conversation with. um, so absolutely, if I'm in the more of them, if in that conversation we're in the point where I'm the mentee, um, then it's incumbent upon me, just like I would expect as a mentor of a mentee, to be doing some homework around it, knowing what I'm wanting to ask, what I'm wanting to dive into in terms of the conversation. And importantly, when that mentor, the one with less experience, is giving me um, feedback, guidance, and recommendations, to act on those. So, for example, in some of those relationships that I mentioned, I would get recommendations around. You know what? I really think you should read this. Or here's a movie that you might want. A few movies that you might want to see. Or here's a show that I just saw on Netflix that I was watching, and you might want to, based on on a conversation in that really, just like I would expect a mentee to act on some of those recommendations. Well, you're the mentee, so it's time, you need to act on some of those things that happen, and then you bring that back to the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, if you've been given a task or a suggestion, it is, your onus to the relationship and the connection to follow up on it after the fact. And, if you don't, you risk kind of breaking that connection and trust that you're creating with the other person. On the opposite side, if you are a junior person kind of put in that mentor space, whether you're trying to share information with a senior leader about maybe a new product or technology or AI or a software that, they need help learning, or if you're talking about the weaknesses or strengths within a culture, and maybe some of that feedback can be intimidating to provide. What sort of suggestions do you have for that junior person who's becoming the mentor, about how to prepare and show up productively?
The first thing I think of is actually, I'll come back to that, but the obligation of the person with more experience is to very explicitly be clear that you're asking for it, that you're wanting it. I mean, part of what you have to do with the person more experience is in essence, whether it's explicit or implicit, make clear there's permission to provide input and guidance and mentorship. So as the less experienced mentor, um, it is easy to fall back into roles, and be hesitant to provide some of what you need to provide in this relationship. So don't be afraid to ask, is this the kind of thing you're looking for? Is this what is what's important? Um, uh, would it be useful if I did, like, ask questions about what the mentee, the person with more experience in the situation, is looking for and wants, because that will help you as the less experienced mentor have more clarity and confidence in what you're providing, and that it's hitting the mark. So I think, asking that question, getting that kind of implicit, explicit permission to provide coaching, because I think very often in that situation there may be subjects, and it goes both ways, that you feel uncomfortable. You might feel like, oh, am I telling that person that they're old if I start to give them input on X, Y, and Z? So that's what's helpful in being explicit about, would this be helpful, would this be useful, is this the kind of thing that you would be valuable for me to share more about?
One other question I wanted us to get to is, how do you really see mentoring software sort of enabling, if not, aiding and supporting more of this kind of trend in reverse mentoring across organizations?
Yeah. What I've seen very clearly is that when you're at a very small size organization, because I say organization purposely, because it's not just a company, it can be a school, it can be a nonprofit, it can be government, it can be whatever the organization is. At a small size, it's something that you can manage pretty well, with an individual kind of taking it on and trying to help make sure that it's happening, or as leadership trying to help make sure it happens. But there comes a size, a couple hundred employees, 500 employees, not to mention 1,000 employees, getting bigger, where it's just unmanageable. It's not something that you can really scale and make happen consistently, and with equity and with inclusiveness. What ends up happening is you get him back into the old situation of the loudest person in the room is the person who gets the mentorship, and the loudest person in the room isn't always the person that is not the only person needs the mentorship. That's not the only person needs developed, and so we're finding more and more that companies are just thirsty for help in how do we scale this and do it in a very inclusive way. And so that's that's the mission we're on. Ultimately, that leads to employees that are committed and being developed, and ultimately companies are able to retain and in the longer term, which obviously has all kinds of ROI for organizations, and makes for a whole employee base that's getting developed. We really believe that organizations can't reach their full potential until their people do.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. Audience, I hope that you all had a couple of takeaways from this, or some things to think about at least. Join us for any of our other videos, or check out Chronus.com for any more mentoring resources for all your mentoring needs.